Hey dreamers, Joe Pardo here. I just wanted to record a quick audio clip. I've been super busy these last couple weeks, so I haven't had a chance to do the Facebook Live. Matt has been sick, so he hasn't been around. It's just been really crazy with so many things going on, and I really want to do it all justice, and I still am going to get my YouTube channel up and running. I know I said I was going to do it in July. I know it's August 1st when I'm recording this, but August 2nd is right around the corner. So I'm going to make it happen. It's just these last couple weeks have been super, super busy for me, which is good. Lots of clients coming through the door, lots of opportunities. For anyone who doesn't know, I was just hanging out with Ben Vereen and Ben Folds, producing an episode for the NAMM show. Go check out their podcast. It's NAMM show, the NAMM show. It's a podcast on iTunes, so you can check it out. So, so many things have been going on. And I just wanted to, record something real quick to let you know that I haven't decided to stop doing these pre-shows, but it's just been really hectic. So I hope everybody has a great week. This episode is with Jeff Barnes. It's episode 241, and Jeff Barnes is a very good friend of mine, and there's awesome stuff around the corner. I'm also going to be working on my third book very, very soon, probably in the next 2 weeks. And from what I can gather, it seems like my book, Sales Won't Save Your Business, is going to be a hit from every person that I've talked to who seems really excited about what I can bring to the table as far as optimizing your business so that when sales peak, you can keep on chugging along. All right, guys and girls, and everyone else, have a wonderful week and enjoy this episode with Jeffrey Barnes. Sorry, Dr. Jeffrey Barnes.
Joe, I have a challenge for you.
What's that, Matt?
I want you to give me a way to support the Dreamers podcast that's not only easy, but it's not going to cost me any money.
Buy stuff on Amazon.
Really?
Yes. Go to superjoepardo.com/Amazon. Update your bookmark for Amazon to that link, superjoepardo.com/Amazon. Every time you make a purchase, I get money.
Joe, in the time it took you to describe that, I've already done it, and I'm a slow typer.
You know what? Why don't you go buy some Mavis typing tutor on Amazon using the superjoepardo.com/Amazon and help contribute to Dreamers Podcast.
It'll be here in 2 days, thanks to Amazon Prime.
Hey Dreamers, today I'm talking with Dr. Jeff Barnes, or should I say Dr. Disneyland, who is making his dreams come true by sharing the wisdom of Walt Disney. Glad to have you on the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Joe.
So for those that don't know, on another show that I'm on, Living the Dream podcast, we interviewed Jeff at the Polynesian bungalows on it was 4th of July weekend. It was really awesome, really special, and Jeff was so gracious to fly from California to Disney World to be there for that event. And of course we had a party, and it was wonderful. It was like we had a party just for you, Jeff.
Getting me to fly to Disney World, boy, that's a tough call. But yeah, that's actually one of the most memorable days and one of the most memorable events of my life. And meeting you and having the opportunity to give that interview and be at Disney World on the 4th of July, very special memory.
Yeah, getting to watch the fireworks on the back deck of that bungalow, like right over the castle, and everything is in a packed house with all Disney heads. Our friend Beatrice Feeney, who was a previous guest a couple times on this show, was so gracious to rent that and throw this party, and it all just worked out beautifully. So it was definitely a treasured memory of mine for sure.
Special day.
So since then though, it's been a whirlwind of book sales and speaking engagements, and just really like you've just been crushing it, Jeff. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and talk about some of the new things that you have going on, and even potentially some new books.
Sure. Joe, you and I've talked, and I believe that every individual has some sort of idea, some sort of crazy thought, some sort of dramatic dream inside of them. Walt wasn't special or unique. He just had the courage to pursue his dreams. And I think when we learn his story, it could inspire and motivate all of us to make our own dreams come true. And, fortunately, because of Walt's example, he's really sort of giving me the opportunity to, start living an even greater story. And, this past year, since the book was released in July, it really has been just that, an absolute whirlwind. For years, I dreamed of teaching a college level course on the history of Disneyland. But 20 years prior to that, I had this idea that, everything that we need to learn in life about leadership and success and to live a great story, all of that is taught to us on an example, at Disneyland or at Disney World. And, here we are, years later, and, we started just this morning the third semester of the history of Disneyland. And, we actually have a book now, and we're about a third way writing a follow-up book entitled Beyond the Wisdom of Walt, more leadership lessons from the happiest place on earth. And 3 years ago, I was probably where most of our listeners are. And that's, you've got this idea, you've got this thought, you've got this dream, but you haven't even really started on it yet. And so my encouragement to everyone is, dreams really do come true, and not just for Walt Disney and not just at Disneyland or Disney World. And we can experience it ourselves if we simply have enough courage to get started.
Most definitely. And that's, that love of following your dreams is what brought you and I together, and so many people with this show, and people that I've gotten to know because of this show, including yourself. So it's a wonderful, it's a story that goes back for me even before this show, just getting to go to Disney World all the time and meeting so many wonderful people that all share that love and passion. So, yeah, I'd agree that a lot of times people don't follow what they really want to accomplish because they put these, it's easy to shoot down things when you're just sitting around on a Sunday afternoon, like spitballing, like, well, I could write this book about Walt Disney, but do I really know enough? Am I really enough of a quote unquote expert on it? Am I, how would I go about doing that? I don't know anything about writing books. I don't know anything about publishing books. I don't know anything. And I would love, Jeff, and I don't recall if we shared the whole story or not, a year ago on Living the Dream, but I would love for you to go back into the background of like telling, the first steps that you took to get this whole book idea off the ground in the first place.
Sure. The book idea probably goes back to about 1991, and I didn't do anything with it. I just sort of, thought about it and, had a bunch of different ideas, but nothing really for certain, nothing in concrete. And then, when Nikki and I got married, and, we actually went to Disneyland because she had never been before. When I took her there on our honeymoon, and I was pointing out, the berm and, how Walt wanted to keep all of the magic inside the park and the distractions of the outside world outside of the park, and how that's just a really important lesson about, staying focused, or, the way in which Walt wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And so he built the park for the purpose of telling stories. And, they don't have rides at Disneyland or Disney World, but instead they have attractions that in fact tell stories. And, I remember saying to her, wow, what if the park isn't just telling us great stories? What if it's actually challenging us to live our own great story? And, she finally stopped me and she said, you realize not everyone knows this, and you realize not everyone sees it this way. And I just sort of assumed, well, everybody knew it and everybody saw it that way. And, so she just gave me even greater encouragement to start putting my ideas down on paper. And, before the book actually started getting written, we turned these ideas into a college level course on the history of Disneyland. And I think to some level, Joe, that was sort of the safer option for me. Because I am in higher education. I do teach a lot of history classes. Now, I'll be honest, I sort of delayed on that for a little while as well, because I didn't want to be the, faculty member who lost his job or lost tenure for, wanting to teach a Mickey Mouse class, if you will. But, eventually I, managed to sell, California Baptist University on the idea. And man, that first summer, it was just phenomenal. And I think it was really there that I came to realize this could work. And what I mean by that is not just work as an idea in my head and not just work as a college level course, but the appetite that the students have for learning about Walt and learning about Disneyland, learning about leadership and learning about success was insatiable to the point where, you know, we couldn't enroll everyone in the class, and, you know, the class couldn't go on for forever. And I sort of realized I have a responsibility here to get this message out to as many people as possible. And so ultimately that looped back into, you know, eventually writing a book, which, you know, became The Wisdom of Walt. And, you know, I think an important story in all of this that's important for the listeners to know is, you know, the day after I gave the very first lecture in my History of Disneyland class 3 summers ago, the very next day I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And, you know, the neurologist at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles said to me, it's life-threatening. It needs to come out. Today's Friday. I need you back here at Tuesday at the latest. And I told him, I said, I'm not going to be back here on Tuesday or any Tuesday in the near future because I have a class to teach. And I think it was in that moment that I truly came to recognize that even beyond a dream, this is a major, major, major passion of mine. And so we put brain surgery off for 2.5 months so I could teach the course. And then as I was recovering, you know, I said to Nikki, I said, it's great that the class got taught. You know, it's great that the surgery went well. It's great that I'm recovering, but I still haven't written the book. And Nikki said, well, what would it take to finally write the book? And that's when we got serious. And I think part of it was fueled by that realization, you know, we're all mortal. None of us are going to be here for forever. And our ideas matter. We have that thought, we have that dream for a reason. And the second we take it seriously, we're going to begin taking action, and we're going to see it come true sooner rather than later.
No, I definitely agree, and it's fortunate that that time that you put off to teach the class wasn't the last class you ever got to teach. Did that ever cross your mind that, like, I might be putting this off for the wrong, like, not for the wrong reasons, but like to the too long, like?
Well, I mean, there were certainly a lot of people in my circle who didn't understand this at all. You know, they certainly didn't understand putting off brain surgery. I've had some people say, forget Tuesday, I wouldn't have left the hospital on Friday without them, you know, getting that thing out of me. And, you know, certainly when they come to find out that it was a college course, and it was a college course on, you know, the history of Disneyland, you know, people either get that or they don't. And all I can say is there was a level of commitment and there was a level of conviction that for whatever reason, I've been blessed, some might even say cursed at some level, to see the park in a certain way that, again, I think translates into ways that can inspire and motivate all of us so that our dreams can come true, not just at Disneyland, but so that we can live each and every day as if it were a day at Disneyland. And if I can get that message out there, I'm willing to make really any sacrifice necessary to see that it gets heard.
I can tell. I have no question in my mind about that. And I kind of agree with those people that say I wouldn't want to leave. I wouldn't want to leave the hospital at that point. I would just be like, all right, what do we got to do? Because this is not good. But you know, all things, you know, happen for a reason, and fortunately everything worked out, and it's worked out better because, you know, it pushed you to write this book and share this what you had inside of you and the passion that you had inside with you with many more people than you'd be able to share with one class in one college in one part of the world.
Exactly. And Joe, I'll tell you, you know, just like you don't ever have story without conflict. If stories don't have conflict, they're just boring and nobody cares. There would be no Wisdom of Walt if I had not been diagnosed with a brain tumor. There would be no book if I had not gone through brain surgery. And so not only do we have a book as a result, I actually think we have a better book as a result. Um, Walt built the park for the purpose of telling stories, and I actually used the Wisdom of Walt to tell some of my own stories, to include some of the stories related to that diagnosis and related to that summer and that surgery. And what I am hearing from readers over and over and over again is that they love the personal connection. They love hearing, my story, and to some degree mine and Nikki's story. And that was a little bit of a risk. There's some vulnerability and some transparency there, and to see that readers are connecting with that is a lot of validation that I really appreciate.
Oh, definitely. And that's what happens when you share your story, right? Like you might get people that are like, I don't get it why you love Disney World or Disneyland and Disney so much. But that's okay, because you know what? Not everyone's gonna get. You're not supposed to be for everyone, right? We're not
Right.
supposed to be loved by
Nope.
everyone at every time, at every moment of our lives. So, uh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised though, that it took so long to get a college or a university on board with this idea of doing a class. What's funny is, and you say like, oh, a Mickey Mouse class, like we can joke like, oh, it's the Mickey Mouse police, and it's like, oh, that's like security guards, right? But the difference between that, when I think of that versus like a Mick job, there's like no comparison there,
Oh, not
like,
even close.
yeah, the level of, and I mean, things have transpired since Walt was here, and everything like that in the job structures and all that. But it to me, it holds a much better weight than saying like, oh, you're a mixed security guard,
Right.
or a McGuard. Or is that a
Yeah.
sandwich, McGuard? I
Yeah.
don't
It
know.
sounds almost more McDonald's than it does Mickey Mouse. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting how culturally we use those terms interchangeably. Today Disney's the largest entertainment company on the planet. I think many people would argue that not only did they set the standard for the hospitality industry, but they created entirely new and different industries by opening Disneyland and then ultimately Disney World. There's not a company that wouldn't want to emulate them in some form or fashion, at least when it comes to their success. And then yet at the same time, we refer to things as, somewhat superficial and narrow as quote unquote Mickey Mouse. And it's sort of interesting, how we want to have it both ways.
Definitely. So, Jeff, could you go into some of the first steps that you took when you were like, okay, let's get serious about the book?
Well, the very first step that we took, Joe, was I hired a coach. And the reason for that is I recognized if I could do this by myself, I would have done it 20 years ago. And, we hadn't been able to get there. And so I went on a limb and I made an investment in my dream. I made an investment in myself. I made an investment in my dream. And we spent a few dollars on a writing and publishing coach. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but what I am saying is your dream's going to require some level of investment and some level of sacrifice. Walt, when he went to build Disneyland, the budget started out at $3.5 to $4 million. By the time they opened the park, it was at $17 million. He had a lot at stake, and dreams are worth that sort of investment and worth that sort of sacrifice. So that was really step number one. And quite frankly, once I had spent some money on the coach, I had some skin in the game. This wasn't just an idea in my head that may or may not happen. The only thing worse than having a dream and not seeing it realized is spending money on your dream and not seeing it realized. So, once we invested in the coach, I was going to write a book regardless. And I think what he helped me to see first and foremost is you don't have to have everything figured out before you get started. I wanted to have the perfect book idea. I wanted to have the perfect book outline. I wanted to write the perfect sentence, the perfect paragraph, the perfect page, the perfect chapter. And like I said, none of that was working because we had sort of stopped and started, stopped and started, stopped and started over the years. And so what he helped me to do is get an outline down that was going to provide the structure necessary for me to begin putting words down on paper. And then once we started writing, he gave me permission. And, trust me, being in academics, this was a huge thing for me. He said, all I need you to do is write a D minus first draft piece of crap manuscript. And I think for a lot of us, we procrastinate on our dreams because we want it to be perfect. We know in our head what we want the final product to be like. And the second we start, and as it begins to get translated, it doesn't look like that perfect vision, then we want to stop and start over and stop and start over and stop and start over. And my coach just said, look, I just need you to write every single day. And I don't need it to be perfect. I don't need it to be an A, a B, a C, or a D manuscript. I just need a D minus first draft. And the illustration that he gave me was, he said, hey, I want you to pretend that you're driving from Disneyland to Disney World. He was using imagery that I could understand here. And he said, if you were going to leave your house in Riverside at night, would you need to be able to see Disney World, Cinderella Castle, through your headlights as you're getting ready to leave California? And I was like, well, no, I'd be lucky if I could see 20 feet in front of me. And he goes, exactly. So every day that you sit down to write, you only need to be able to write 20 feet in front of you. And then as far as gas, he said, are you going to have enough gas in your tank to get you all the way to Orlando? Now, Joe, we drive Toyota Prius out here in California. We get really good gas mileage. We're not getting all the way to Orlando on a single tank of gas. And so his encouragement was, in order to keep moving forward on my dream of writing The Wisdom of Walt, was I only needed to write enough to get me to the next day or to get me to the next gas station. And then, 333 words becomes 666 words, becomes 999 words. He talked about it, trying to scale the mountain. And, before you know it, you have a complete, finished, D minus 67,000 word manuscript. And then you simply begin to edit from there.
I definitely agree. Doing two books myself, you don't always know how it's gonna turn out, but you have to work it out. And I'm a big proponent of doing the outlines. If you do an outline,
Yep.
then you can fill in the outline like that, like overnight. But very similar to writing a manuscript and putting those pieces together, and then fitting it together like a puzzle, and then editing and rewriting parts that don't make sense, or parts that you would say, oh, I already said this earlier, I don't need to say it again, at least
Mm-hmm.
not in the same exact way or the same exact manner that I did before. So yeah, just getting started. A big, on this show, listeners know I'm a big proponent of just do a Google search. That's the first step of anything. Do a Google search, and
Yep.
then you can figure out what the terminology is. And once you get the terminology down, it's just like learning a language. You start going through and you figure it out, and you do a little more searching and a little more. And in this case, it's about writing, but though it all starts with just the initiative to be like, I'm going to do this. And I love the gas station terminology, because like at times that we do find ourselves stalled, because we like, oh well, how do we do this or how do we do that? But to me, like, that's where that good outline comes into play, like, because you already know what direction you're going to go into, and you don't have to like write yourself into a dead end, if you will.
Right. No, exactly. I think the real encouragement there is to simply get started and trust the creative process. And, the story that I like to share really goes back to Walt and his dream of Disneyland. At some point, he came to realize that, his dream for an amusement park was bigger than, the few acres that he had in Burbank next to the studio. And so they would go out and, purchase property in Anaheim. And, then they would need corporate sponsors and loans from banks. And so they were getting ready to send Roy out to New York to secure all of that. And Walt would go on to say that, dreams don't have collateral. And so those bankers and those corporate sponsors were going to be looking for something tangible, something concrete. And it was at that point that they realized we need to get this dream, this idea of Disneyland out of Walt's head and on some sort of piece of paper that looks like a map. And so on a Saturday morning, 48 hours before Roy headed east, they called Herb Ryman in and said, hey, we're building an amusement park. And Herb says, well, that sounds great. What are you going to call it? Walt says, we're going to call it Disneyland. And Herb says, well, that's about as good a name as any. I'd love to see a map so I can, tell what it looks like. And they were like, well, funny, you should say that. We don't have a map. In fact, that's why you're here. We need one, and we need one by Monday. And Herb goes, oh, no, Walt. There's no way I can do this in 48 hours. The first I've heard of it, I would end up embarrassing you, embarrassing your dream, and embarrassing me. And Walt would go on to say to Herbie, well, Herbie, this is my dream. I've wanted it my entire life. If I stayed here with you, would you be willing to work on it then? And Herbie, of course, agreed. And over the next 48 hours in what came to be known of as the Lost Weekend, all of these ideas that had been percolating in Walt's mind for 15 years, if not a lifetime, were finally put down on paper. And today, it's the most valuable artwork anywhere in the Disney archives. And yet, when you look at that first map of Disneyland, sure, a lot of it looks like Disneyland even to today. And yet at the same time, there are pieces and parts of it that were never built and never saw the light of day. Walt didn't need that map to be perfect. He simply needed it to get started.
Definitely. Jeff, speaking of getting started, how did your family take it when you were like, okay, we're going to get this book thing serious?
Nikki is my biggest supporter and biggest fan. She always believes in whatever idea or dream that I, am coming up with next. And so she was very, very supportive. Our children were a little bit, and I'm not sure, our youngest ones really understood. And, it took a lot of time away from them. It took a lot of time away from, family opportunities. Quite frankly, I think they were glad when it was done, so that my answer to everything wasn't always, I'm sorry, but I'm, writing, we're not going to be able to do that right now. And then our daughter, who works as an investigative journalist in Las Vegas, she was really supportive. She makes her living as a writer. And, she has heard of this dream for, more than 20 years as well. And, she was just thrilled to, see it finally, get put down on paper.
Oh, that's wonderful. So with that said, what was the biggest roadblock for you? Like, I guess across the whole thing, from speaking to writing the book, like, what's been the biggest thing that's held you back?
I think confidence. I kept saying to my coach, you want D- manuscript, first draft. Well, what if I'm an F writer? And, everything that I wrote, I'm like, this is a piece of crap. This isn't any good. I don't know what I'm doing. Who am I to think that I could become a writer? Who am I to think that I could, possibly write a book? And that really stayed with me probably through the first half of the manuscript. And a couple of things happened that sort of helped transform that. One of them happened, and I didn't write from beginning to end, using the gas station mentality. I committed to a discipline of 333 words every single day, no matter what. Now, there were some days when we wrote more, but we never wrote anything less. And I was working on the introduction to all who read this happy book one afternoon. And I was talking about how I believe we can live every day like it's a day at Disneyland. And then I was encouraging the readers to listen to the park. And after I said listen to the park, I then ended it with Mickey Mouse ears not required. And I didn't think about it, I didn't, it just came out. It just appeared right there on the screen. And the second I wrote that, Joe, it was like, wow, you can do this. You might actually have something here. And then, as I've heard from readers, aside from the personal stories, as you know, each chapter has a souvenir stop, which is where the reader gets to work on their dreams or work on whatever the lesson for that particular chapter might be. It's sort of a workbook part of the Wisdom of Walt. And the souvenir stops, and then the very final story in each chapter is referred to as a hand stamp story. The idea being that this is going to be the story that I'll share at the end of each chapter that is most memorable and stamps the lesson from that chapter onto your mind or maybe even onto your heart. And the idea being, you're at the end of the chapter, but you're not at the end of your day or at the end of the Wisdom of Walt. We expect that you're going to come back. And of course, when you go to Disneyland or Disney World, in order to re-enter the park, you have to have a hand stamp. And so it was about halfway through that I came up with the structure of a souvenir stop and a hand stamp story. And people have just said that that's really their favorite part of the book. I would love to tell you that 20 years ago I had that idea. I would love to tell you that when I sat down and did the outline, I had that idea. I'm just not that bright. It really sort of came to me about halfway through the process. And so my encouragement to the listeners is whatever your dream is, whatever that idea might be, just trust it and trust yourself. Get started, and somewhere along the way, it's going to start making sense. And when it does, you're going to build an awful lot of confidence.
Oh, most certainly, yeah. I mean, again, it does. It starts with just getting started, and the best ideas, because again, you're not just sitting there spitballing ideas, without actually getting any traction or actually putting any, boots to the ground there on your dream. So yeah, doing those things. I mean, so, like a lot of my best ideas didn't come from just sitting around. They came from getting involved with the project that I'm working on, and then like, oh, this sounds good, or this will work, or this could work, or here's why this thing won't work, but maybe if I do, oh, look at this, it worked out,
Yep.
and then you
Yep.
look like a genius, but you put the work in, you put the time in, you put the thought in, you put the process in,
Yep.
and over time, that's what it doesn't. You don't get the. I mean, Walt's original ideas didn't all come to fruition the way he expected them to.
No,
You
of
have
course
to
not.
tackle problem after problem after problem, and then come up, with multiple solutions for those problems, because they introduce more problems when you introduce those solutions. So
Yep.
it's so difficult. But it's made really easy just by doing the work.
Yeah. I mean, Walt himself once said the best way to get something done is to stop talking and start doing. We have to show up. And, dreams require work. And, I don't care if it's 333 words or 20 minutes a day, whatever the case may be, we simply have to show up. I think our ideas and our dreams deserve that. And when we show up every single day, somewhere along the way, something special and something magical is going to happen.
What's funny is you remind me of of my teachers of past that said, like, if you just do the work, you're gonna get like at least a B. If you just do
Yes.
the work, like you
Yep.
don't have to, it doesn't have to be an A, but just doing the work is enough to get you, more than an average.
Yep. Woody Allen once said 90% of life is showing up. And so whatever your dream is, it needs you to show up. And when you show up, the muse or the genius or something special at some point is going to show up as well.
Most definitely. Jeff, what was your childhood dream growing up?
I wanted to be a U.S. history teacher. If you had, asked anyone in elementary, middle, or high school, hey, what's Jeff going to do? They would have said he's going to be a U.S. history teacher. He's going to be an American government teacher. He's going to be a civics teacher. And it took me a while to sort of figure that out. And, now I'm really living my dream of teaching not just U.S. history, but actually teaching, the history of Disneyland. I believe that the park really models and mirrors who we are as the American people from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and beyond. And I do believe it is the ultimate source of motivation and inspiration for all of us to see our own dreams come true.
I couldn't agree more. Obviously, obviously. But it's funny. A friend of mine and previous guest on the show, I was hanging out with my friend in Disneyland, and she had never really she had been to Disneyland like one time before, and she just couldn't get it. And by the end of the day, she kind of understood it, even though she wasn't like a raving fan of it. She put it in a way like like when we're standing in line for Pirates of the Caribbean, like we're
Mm-hmm.
standing, and the thing is I was explaining it this way, but I wasn't explaining it in a way that she understood, and the way she explained it back to me I think makes a lot more sense, which was we're basically standing in a living painting. It's a living art project, and then she got it. Like she's like, oh, I understand why this means so much to you, because everything that's here is set up for a very specific reason, and everything's done very intentionally, and it just didn't just kind of, oh well, that just happened because so and so didn't show up to work that day, and
Right.
well, except for that one story with the orange groves getting cut, the trees that got cut down. For anyone who doesn't know, what was it? The guy was colorblind that was cutting down the trees at Disneyland before it was
Yeah,
there.
when Walt first picked out the 180 acres in Anaheim, there's a lot of different reasons why he picked the property in Anaheim, but one of those reasons was, he wanted a flat canvas where he could build his own version of rivers and jungle cruises and mountains and pirate ships. And the land, of course, started off as orange groves and walnut trees, and most of those trees needed to be cleared, but then some of them he wanted to save specifically for, say foliage in the Jungle Cruise or some, trees in Frontierland. And so they went through and they tagged green all of the trees that they wanted to be cleared and red the ones that they wanted to keep. And then Walt went out and hired a color blind bulldozer operator, and he managed to clear all of them. And I think sometimes that's kind of feels like the way life happens. We get started on our dream and we want it to go one way, and it ends up going in a completely different direction, and that's part of the process too.
Though, when you really think about it, it wasn't. It actually worked out in his favor because he really got that blank canvas that he was looking for. Um,
He did get the blank canvas, and Walt had a way of turning obstacles into advantages, and I think that's another important lesson here. You're going to face roadblocks, you're going to face obstacles, and the question isn't if, but it's really when. And being able to turn those into your advantage is just going to enable you to see your dream to completion.
yeah, definitely. So, Jeff, what do your dreams for the future look like now that you have the soft cover book of Wisdom of Walt is out?
Well, we have two immediate future dreams. One, I wanted to teach the history of Disneyland, and we're doing that for the third summer in a row. I wanted to write a book, and The Wisdom of Walt was released last summer, and then I want to walk onto Main Street and buy a copy of my book. Now, my wife Nikki doesn't really understand that. We've got 800 copies of The Wisdom of Walt sitting in the garage right now. So the idea that we're going to travel 33 miles to Main Street and spend our own money for a copy of a book that I wrote, she doesn't quite get that. Uh, but when I was writing the book, I had actually gone onto Main Street and went into the bookstore where they sell books and took a picture of their bookcase. And I used that as sort of a visualization technique every morning or every evening, depending on what time of day I was writing. And I would stare at that bookcase before I would sit down to write as part of my dream of, I'm going to get this book done and it's going to sell so well that Disney itself is going to want it. And as a result, I'm going to walk into Disneyland. I'm going to walk onto Main Street. I'm going to go into that bookstore and I'm going to purchase a copy of my own book. And the paperback version was picked up by Theme Park Press. It was released 2 weeks ago. and they are in the process of pitching it to Disney even now. And so hopefully in the not too distant future, that dream is ultimately going to be realized. And then moving forward from that, we're about a third of the way through a follow-up book. I came to realize there's more leadership lessons, there's more life lessons that we didn't cover in The Wisdom of Walt. And then, Walt passed away at the age of 65 in December of 1966. Disneyland's the only park that he ever actually walked in. They wouldn't break ground on Disney World, Magic Kingdom in Florida until 1967. And, that park has its own history and that park has its own story. And so I want to go beyond Walt's life and, talk not just about Disneyland, but Disney World as well. And really some of the life lessons that we can learn from Roy and some of the other Imagineers and some of the other Disney leaders.
Definitely. And there was even talks of another book for the small people of the world.
Well, it's interesting because I've done as many as 6 book events in a single weekend, and I can't tell you the number of adults who have asked me for a children or youth version of The Wisdom of Walt. They know that their kids love Disneyland, and they see that as a ready-made vehicle for inspiring them and motivating them to live a great story as early as possible. And so I would love to find someone like, say, Super Joe Pardo to partner with to help turn The Wisdom of Walt into a story that would resonate with an even younger audience.
Well, I gotta say, if that's an official ask, I'm down, man.
Well, it's an official ask.
Yeah, let's talk about that after we get done recording here, which we sadly pretty much have come to the end here. So. Jeff, before we share how people can connect with you, get The Wisdom of Walt, I don't know about upcoming, but any big upcoming events that you have in the next, say 3 months or so, is there any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I think most of all, I want to encourage our listeners. You know what that idea is. You know what that thought is that keeps you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know what the dream is. And my encouragement again is have that courage, get started, know that your dream can in fact come true. It did for Walt. I'm very blessed and very fortunate because it did for me. And I believe it can for each and every one of us. When Disneyland opened in 1955, we needed it. And I believe we need whatever your dream might be as well. And the world is going to be less if you don't show up and make it happen. As far as upcoming future events, we're doing a number of local things here in May. I think probably the biggest event this summer is we're doing a couple of speaking events for the annual Disneyana Fan Convention in Anaheim in July. And of course, all of that is built around Disneyland's birthday. So it starts on July 13th and runs through the 16th, and then we all, of course, head to the park and sing Happy Birthday to the original Disneyland on July 17th.
Awesome. Jeff, can you please share how people can connect with you?
Sure. You can find me at thewisdomofwalt.com. You can find me on Facebook, Jeff Barnes. The Wisdom of Walt, Leadership Lessons from the Happiest Place on Earth, has its own Facebook page. The book is available, hard copy, soft cover, ebook, audiobook. All 4 versions can be found on Amazon. Again, the title of the book is The Wisdom of Walt, Leadership Lessons from the Happiest Place on Earth. And I am on Twitter at Dr. Disneyland.
Awesome. I will definitely have that in the show notes for people to reach out and connect with you. And I really invite them to do so because Jeff is a great guy. I'm so happy to be able to call him my friend, and we chat regularly. So thank you, Jeff, for taking the time to be on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Joe. It's been my honor.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dreamers Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Dreamers Podcast. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Dreamers Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Dreamers podcast, please send an email to j@jpar.co. This podcast is copyright 2014 by jpar.co.